You alive? When I returned home for the first time in a year, there was my 5-year-old niece sleeping in the garden on a cardboard. I was puzzled by this strange sight. After all I had heard that my brother's child had passed away in an accident last year, moreover wearing tattered clothes, and looking emaciated, she was completely different from the way I remembered her. Where's your dad? Daddy went somewhere with a new mommy. My niece looked up at me with a frightened, mournful expression. Anyway, I can't let this child stay here. I immediately took my niece and left my parents' house. My family has been running a food manufacturing business since my grandfather's generation. We owned offices and factories, and I think we were a reasonably wealthy family in the local area. My family and relatives, including my grandfather, were old-fashioned people who believed that if you were going to have children, you should have a male heir. When I was born as the eldest daughter in such a family, my parents were deeply disappointed. My father was cold to me for not becoming the successor of the company, and my mother, who was blamed by my father and relatives for giving birth to a girl, seemed to resent me. And since my younger brother Lucas was born when I was 5 years old, I became completely burdensome to the family. I was raised differently from my brother in everything from daily meals, clothes, lessons, and the school I attended. Spoiled by my parents and cherished by relatives, my brother grew up to be exactly like my father. He looked down on me and behaved like a prince at home, and my parents let him do as he pleased without reproach. I became completely fed up with such a family, so after graduating from high school, I went to a university far from home, even when I studied abroad, and got a job offer from an overseas apparel firm. The only words I got from my parents were "do as you like." Since then, I have remained estranged from my family. I received news of my mother's sudden death when I was 9 years old. When I returned home temporarily to attend the funeral, I met that child for the first time. Hey, let's play. During the funeral, a girl of about 3 years old came up to me with a ball in her hand and pulled the hem of my skirt. I wonder who she is. A relative's child. Since I hadn't been back to the US for several years, I thought she must be a child born to some relative during that time. Sure, let's play. What's your name? I squatted down to her eye level, and the girl replied with a smile, "I'm Gabriel." I remember how adorable she looked, just bouncing with joy when I rolled the ball for her. While we were playing in the yard for a while, my brother Lucas, who seemed to have come to smoke, approached us with a dubious look. "Hey, big sis, everyone else is still working, you know. What are you slacking off here for, Dad?" I was taken aback by Gabriel's words. Ignoring me, Lucas bluntly said, "Everyone's busy, so go back to your room," and chased Gabriel into a nearby room. "Wait, what? Who's her father? Whose child is she?" "It's none of your business." With a curt reply, my brother threw away his cigarette and quickly left the scene. It was as if he didn't want me to touch upon the subject of that child. Curious, I made inquiries about Gabriel while helping the relatives, and I was surprised to learn from them that she was Lucas's daughter. "She's your niece, isn't she? Didn't you know?" they said. I was speechless. Not only did I not know that my brother had a daughter, but I didn't even know he was married. When I asked for more details, it seemed that while I was away in America, my brother had been living his life as he pleased. After fooling around in college, he got his girlfriend pregnant and had a shotgun wedding. After graduating, he lived with his wife and child at my parents' house under the pretext of taking over the family business. But he left all the work to my parents and his wife. My parents continued to spoil my brother as usual and didn't care at all about his wife. The wife, who was treated like a servant and helped with the family business for free, finally couldn't stand it anymore and divorced him, leaving their daughter Gabriel behind, and disappeared without a trace. Earlier this year, the relatives criticized the former wife, saying leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter like that is outrageous. But I couldn't bring myself to blame her. If you've grown up normally, you wouldn't be able to endure living with parents who favored their eldest son and a brother who acted like a king, even for a few days. Did my father and brother not inform me about the marriage or the niece because they didn't want to consider me a relative? It doesn't matter anymore. A year later, just after the first anniversary of my mother's death, my father followed her into the afterlife. Dealing with the funeral stuff seems like a hassle. So, big sis, you do it. you're the eldest daughter. When I received such a message from my brother, I couldn't help but feel angry. Don't you feel any gratitude for being raised so well, Dad, Mom? They were both terrible at raising children. However, I was also urged by the employees of my father's company and the relatives to handle the funeral, and I ended up returning home and taking charge of the funeral. It was a few days that I was not looking forward to, but I had one thing to look forward to. Can I see Gabriel again? Is it because I'm the closest relative after my brother among the blood relatives? Since the first time we met, I had been curious about Gabriel for various reasons. However, during the funeral, I couldn't find my niece anywhere. Instead, standing next to my brother was a young woman I hadn't seen before. Casually inquiring, the woman introduced herself as my brother's new wife. I apologize for the late introduction. I'm Lucas's sister, by the way. Where is Gabriel today? Upon asking, she looked sad and bowed her head. The new wife said, our daughter passed away in an accident 6 months ago. Furthermore, she continued, her injuries were severe, so we kept the funeral as private as possible. I had just become part of our new family. I was so shocked that I froze on the spot. The sense of loss at that moment was perhaps even greater than losing my parents. That child is no longer here. Once again, I wasn't informed of anything. However, without time to dwell on the sadness, as soon as the funeral was over, those around me immediately urged discussions about inheritance. You should handle the procedures since they're bother. Oh, but all the assets belong to me. Don't hold it against me. It's in Dad's will. My brother said this triumphantly, but I didn't care. It was easy to imagine that everything would be left to the eldest son as stated in the will. I just wanted to sever ties with this family as soon as possible, as I didn't care about anything else. With that in mind, I left all the administrative tasks to the notary public and lawyers. I knew as a result my brother ended up inheriting the family's land, house, and business. I handed over my niece's condolence money to the new wife and then left America as if fleeing. Then one day, a year later, something happened. I was ordered to go on a business trip to an American design company affiliated with my workplace. I might as well take a trip while I'm at it. There are places I want to visit. I took a few days off after returning from the business trip, as the world was in the midst of the summer vacation season. Watching families going home for the holidays, I felt like visiting the gravesite. I want to see that child. I remember Gabriel, who had spoken to me 2 years ago. Why did I feel so nostalgic for my niece, whom I had only played with once? It's truly mysterious. Before I knew it, I found myself heading towards the graves where my parents slept, and as I offered flowers and cleaned the gravestone, something caught my attention. Why isn't Gabriel's name on the gravestone? Feeling strange, I immediately decided to visit my parents' house. However, when I rang the doorbell, no one came out, as if they were not at home. At a loss, I stood there for a while, and then I heard a noise coming from the back of the house. Is someone in the garden? Timidly, I walked towards the source of the sound. The moment I saw the bizarre sight spread out there, I couldn't move for a while. In a place not visible from the street, there were countless old cardboard boxes piled up haphazardly. In the center, there was the figure of a girl lying down, curled up. Small. As I stood dumbfounded, she noticed my presence too. She got up clumsily and said in a thin voice, who are you? I used to live in this house, and you covered in garbage, skinny, and wearing tattered clothes. The girl was honestly a little eerie. However, with the next words she uttered, that feeling vanished instantly. I'm Gabriel. The girl said the name of my niece, whom I had longed to see. Is it true you're alive? As I inadvertently grabbed Gabriel's shoulder and said so, she trembled and showed a frightened expression. Oh, sorry for surprising you. I'm your father's older sister. Don't you remember we played with a ball before? I'm sorry, I don't remember, since my niece was only 3 years old at the time. It's understandable that she didn't remember me. Where's not good to let this child stay here. Intuitively thinking, so I picked up my niece and ran away without thinking about the consequences. From there, I took Gabriel to the weekly apartment I was renting while staying in America. I fed her, bathed her, and dressed her in new clothes I bought on my way back. And it was then that I finally realized what I had done. I took the child without permission from the guardian. I might be reported. As I thought about such things, Gabriel began to cry. Oh, I see, it must be scary to suddenly have someone you don't know doing all sorts of things to you. I'm sorry. No, it's not that the food is delicious, the bath is warm, this place is like heaven, and thank you, Auntie. With a relieved expression, my niece said, so I heard that she hadn't had a decent meal or bath for a long time. Where did my brother go? Why is Gabriel living in such a place? There were so many things I wanted to know. I couldn't get any useful information, even when I asked my 5-year-old niece. I tried to contact my brother many times, and finally, 2 days after protecting Gabriel, I was able to get through to him finally. Where are you leaving your own child, H? Don't suddenly yell at me, you're annoying. Hey, she was with you, wasn't she? It's perfect. From now on, you're going to take care of Gabriel. Lucas showed no signs of remorse, and on the contrary, said something outrageous. What are you saying? Wasn't that child supposed to be dead? Did I say that? But it's not my fault. My current wife said she doesn't want other people's children. I was in trouble too. The current wife he mentioned is undoubtedly the second wife I met a year ago. She had sincerely conveyed her regret that my niece had passed away, but now she's saying she doesn't want her. I couldn't believe it. I don't know where the ex-wife went, and neither of my parents is here. Feel free to adopt her if you want. It's a hassle. While I was confused, my brother simply said that and hung up the phone. I tried to contact him again, but it seemed that he had turned off his phone the next day. I also went to my brother's company, but I couldn't get through to him. Nevertheless, I wanted to know the details, so I tried to contact relatives and company employees, one after another. Then I was able to get in touch with a former employee who used to work under my father and learned about my brother and niece's situation. My brother officially became the manager of the company when my father fell ill, but he brought the company to the brink of bankruptcy in less than half a year. He didn't learn anything about managing a business and just lounged around in the president's chair. So it's natural the second wife is the daughter of the president of a company with whom my father had a long-standing relationship. And since she hadn't been very fortunate in finding a good match, the parents introduced them to each other. The president on the other side said, let's merge our companies if you have a daughter and a child, and my father and brother agreed without hesitation. Moreover, as a ridiculous bonus for agreeing to the merger, if they agreed to the merger, they would help with the financial management of my brother's company and even shoulder his debts. My greedy father and brother jumped at the chance. The formal procedure was planned to be carried out when they had a child between them. After that, I stopped seeing my niece around the house. That was how it ended, and anger welled up inside me. Don't you find it strange that the president's daughter suddenly disappeared from the house? Since there were frequent comings and goings of employees between the company and my parents' house, it's hard to believe that no one knew about my niece. I was just an employee and could only follow the wishes of the presidents. Besides, I've already retired. The former employee's excuses seemed somewhat lame, and when I was told to take care of her, I almost shouted. After that, although there were some relatives who contacted me, they all said the same thing. I don't want to get involved, or it's none of our business. Even though a 5-year-old child was suffering, all my relatives are unanimously thinking that these people were my relatives, made me really dislike them. And I literally held my head in my hands. Auntie, am I an unwanted child? My niece muttered suddenly, just like when I first met her. While pulling the hem of my skirt, I watched her with rapt seriousness of the matter, said furious calls and messages like a demon. I only replied, I'll explain it to you, so come to the company. And with the lawyer headed to the conference room of my brother's company, where my brother and his wife were already waiting. Furious, hey, you damn sister, why is our parents' house up for sale? What do you mean selling the car and the factory? According to my brother and his wife, a bailiff suddenly came to their house this morning and told them to vacate their home. It's all written in the documents that were sent to you by the court. My brother, who was about to grab me and attack, I responded calmly. Most likely he ignored the contents of the certified mail and just threw it away. It's what the court decided. Since we agreed you have to pay what you owe, I didn't agree to anything besides. I don't remember you asking me for money. Why do I have to explain what was written in the documents again? A year ago, didn't you take all of Dad's inheritance that was actually not allowed so I used my rights to file a complaint, yes, a year ago. When I went through the inheritance procedures, I'd also filed a complaint called an infringement of the reserved portion, a right to demand fair distribution against a will that unfairly distributes inheritance to specific individuals. At that time, I had intended to abandon all the inheritance because I wanted to sever ties with my family. However, the judicial scryer explained this right to me and said, "Stop panicking, because they'll always protect you when something happens," he said. And so I am truly grateful to the judicial scryer who recommended me to apply at that time. The inheritance my brother received amounted to $2 million, including my parents' savings money from selling cars and the value of land and buildings. I claimed my reserved portion of $1 million. Originally, inheritance should be shared among all heirs, so you should have split my inheritance in half at that time using gentle words that even a primary school child could understand, I explained. But my brother remained angry. "Dad's will said all the property would be inherited by me, so you have no rights. That will was determined to violate my rights. In other words, the will is not valid. What's that you never said anything about it at that time. The certified mail should have arrived from the judicial scryer. You're at fault for only looking at documents that suit you, aren't you? I didn't know anything about being claimed in the world of adults. Not knowing is not an excuse. Even though he's the president, it seemed he didn't know such things. Thank you for leaving me alone for a year. Thanks to you, I was able to be ignored for my claim. And now I can bring it to court," while calmly lining up my words, which seemed to irritate my brother. He clicked his tongue and glared at me resentfully. "You were just passing it off to the judicial scryer and lawyer, and now you suddenly want money. You're a sneaky woman." A year ago, I applied as a last resort. I thought I'd let it go even if 10 years passed and the statute of limitations expired, and I didn't want the company or the house anyway. Then you should have left it alone. Or is your purpose to harass me? You're really a mean woman. I've always hated that about you since we were kids. I don't mind if you hate me. The circumstances have changed. I won't let you have your way anymore." As sparks flew in the heated argument, the lawyer cleared his throat, as if to interrupt regarding this matter. Since the defendant did not appear in court in response to the summons, the plaintiff's claims have been fully recognized. He calmly stated only the facts. If my brother had attended the trial properly, perhaps he wouldn't have had to pay according to our terms. He probably couldn't afford such a large sum as $1 million. I knew that my brother and his wife were relying on the inheritance left by our parents and the assets of the second wife's family, and I also knew that they had been squandering their money without doing any proper work. The assessed value of the family's land and house at the time was around $300,000. Right. The rest will be paid in installments. Do you think you'll win with that? My brother suddenly sneered and pulled his wife close before speaking. "If we have a child together, our company will merge with her family's. Then it'll be easy to come up with $1 million. We're still young, and we can have a child right away," he added. And they both laughed triumphantly. "What about the child? What will happen to Gabriel?" I didn't expect a reasonable answer, but I asked anyway. "I don't want a child conceived with a stranger. Besides, as a woman, she won't be in hair, and I have no obligation to raise her." The first to respond was the second wife. Her expression was filled with malice, completely different from what I saw at the funeral. I felt a little scared of her duality. "If a legitimate heir is born between us, we don't need her. If you don't take her, she'll just go to an institution." This was the reaction I expected. I said, "Is that so?" with apparent disinterest, then took out my phone. "By the way, your father seems really angry about my niece. Is everything okay?" I said to the second wife, pointing my phone at her, showing the furious face of a man. The two of them, upon seeing the image, visibly changed their expressions, and for good reason, because the man in the image was the second wife's father, the father glaring at my brother. "I never heard anything about a child. If what Lucas's sister said is true, it makes me doubt you guys' character," he quietly stated. Then he turned to the second wife and shouted, "I never raised a heartless person who would mistreat a young child like that." Why, how it seemed my brother didn't expect me to contact the second wife's father, and the couple began to tremble. "It's impossible. not to make arrangements. When you think about it, normally not only did my brother have a child with his ex-wife, but he also never mentioned my existence to the second wife's parents. If he seriously thought he could keep it hidden, it was incredibly naive. The father said a man who would abandon his own child for money is not needed in our family. There will be no talk of a merger, and my daughter will be disowned. And he hung up the phone. I was relieved, but the second wife's father turned out to be a decent person. Hey, where did you take Gabriel? Bring her back now, my brother shouted, pale. What are you going to do with that child? You don't want her, right? Shut up. She's my child. Gabriel belongs to me. I'll take her. If you won't, too bad. I've already completed the adoption process, so she's already part of my family. What the hell are you doing? You didn't say anything about it. You said to do as I pleased. In the next moment, my brother finally grabbed me by the collar. Immediately, the lawyer restrained him, but he struggled and couldn't be restrained, despite his face turning red with anger. Tears welled up in his eyes. You useless burden on the family. You're worthless. You should just listen to me. And Dad, stamping his feet and saying whatever came to mind. Lucas was like a child throwing a tantrum. If the merger falls through, my company will go bankrupt. Then I won't be able to pay you any money. He forgot that this was a company meeting and finally started crying like a baby. At that moment, employees who had heard the commotion gathered around. Deal with this young guy. Isn't he your boss? As I said to the crowds, several men began to restrain my brother. The inheritance has already been legally determined to be paid. Work hard and pay it off. I don't know anything about the company. Finally, I spoke calmly to my subdued brother, making eye contact with him. You can't escape from the court. Don't say it's too much trouble anymore. Looking back, I realized that I had never scolded my brother like this before. As his older sister, for him, who had always been the prince, being admonished by his older sister must have been the ultimate humiliation. But Lucas couldn't say anything back and just slumped to his knees. Afterward, my brother and his wife divorced, and our family's company went bankrupt. Soon after, my brother sold the family home and car, but it was nowhere near enough to cover the claimed inheritance. I used my connections to introduce my brother to a cleaning job through a dispatch agency, but in the end, he only worked earnestly at first and quit after a few months. He couldn't endure manual labor and extreme poverty, having been a prince all his life. Recently, I heard from colleagues in America that my brother, who looked like a homeless person, was seen sleeping in a park on cardboard. On the other hand, my niece immigrated overseas with me and started attending a local elementary school this spring. She is loved by all my colleagues and friends and is enjoying happy days. She will never again think of herself as an unwanted child. How did you like this story? Please consider subscribing to the channel. Well, then let's meet in the next.